Hello, eventually, and welcome to the Metagame. This is the live streaming show on the Dice Towers YouTube channel, where we not only talk about board games, but often talk about talking about board games. Hence, the meta aspect of the show. And helping me not sit here and just talk to myself for an hour, helping me not do that, joining me live in the studio, is the YouTube chat. Because the way that this show works, in case you're just joining us for the first time here, is the way that this show works is I am going to present a topic, something from our wild, crazy world of board gaming, and I'm going to then turn the discussion over to the YouTube chat, the people that are joining us as this is live streaming, and we'll continue the discussion back and forth with the chat as well. And today's topic, sweet and sour gaming experiences, which we'll get to in a moment, is one of those topics that may lend itself to kind of longer stories and longer examples. So one thing that I did is a couple days ago, when this live event got posted, I also went and created a forum thread on the Dice Towers Board Game Geek Guild, asking people for their stories about sweet and sour gaming experiences there as well. And like a good host would, I have compiled a list of some of those excerpts that people have talked about, and I'll be going through those as well. So we'll have discussion from moi, discussion from the Board Game Geek forum, and discussion with the live chat. All right. And I apologize if you are watching the live stream. I apologize for the slight delay in getting started today. Today's metagame episode is brought to you, is almost not brought to you at all from Windows 10's anniversary update. It's a really awesome update that we want you to have. Even if you repeatedly tell Windows, no, don't install this, we're going to eventually install it for you anyway. That's Windows 10's anniversary update. Your computer's ours now. So, thanks to our sponsor for helping get the show started when it did. And let's now turn to the topic of discussion for the day, sweet and sour gaming experiences. Okay, so today's topic is actually based on a suggestion that I received from a viewer named Daniel W., who shared a short story with me of a gaming experience that he had in which he wanted a do-over. His story was that several years ago, he was in a HeroScape tournament. And in this tournament, he had his army ready, he was ready to go, he knew how to play the game, but just due to a series of unfortunate events and some really unlucky die rolls in a couple of his games, he found himself just out of the tournament, like in the first round, really fast, far sooner than he had expected or wanted to be. And I guess there was also some issues with the person that was his opponent. Perhaps in later rounds, there was some issues of the fairness of the way that his opponent was playing and stuff like that. So he felt like he got shut out of the tournament far sooner than he should have been. So because of that, he told me that he wanted a do-over. It didn't ruin HeroScape for him, but he wished it was one thing that he could try over again because it just was not a good gaming experience. So it got me thinking, as most things do, about myself and how this could relate to some gaming experiences that I've had. Because I think I've mentioned in other episodes, while in Daniel's case, a bad board gaming experience didn't sour him to the game, but sweetened the pot, increasing his desire to try it over again, I thought of a couple examples I've had of both kind of sweetened and soured experience. For example, one game that I played once at a gaming club meeting was this game Spartacus by Gale Forstein. And it was a very interesting experience because it was my very first game of Spartacus. And I played it with a buddy of mine that I was there at the game club with. And this fellow came up to us and said, "Hey, you want to play Spartacus?" And we're like, "Okay, sure, sounds neat." So we sat down at the table. And as the gentleman is setting up the game, he mentions, we're looking, the table's really full. I mean, people are bringing over extra chairs. And there's like 7 of us, 7 people sitting at this table. Like, wow, Spartacus plays up to 7 people? It's like, no, it doesn't. But I have all the expansions, and I have a couple of house rules and player-made extra characters to increase the player count up to 7. But okay, that's going to be a big game. And with all of the expansions, the player-made characters. Oh, and then there were house rules to change. There's some improvements, not just stuff he made up himself, but stuff from the Board Game Geek community. Some well-established house rules that changed some of the things. So we weren't even learning the actual game. We were learning some of the combat and other things were different. But the result was that the game was a mess. I felt like when I took my turns, I had no idea what I was doing. I was kind of just repeating what other people were doing and taking a stab in the dark. Since with Spartacus, both figuratively and literally, taking a stab in the dark at how to play the game. And fortunately, I'm not sure, the game, that magnitude of game went really long. In fact, I kind of knew up front I had a very specific timeline I was on, and up front it's like, if it reaches this time, I'm going to have to bug out. And sure enough, the game went so long, I ran out of time and had to excuse myself. My friend, though, my buddy, wasn't as fortunate, and I apologize. Sorry, man. But anyway, I'm not going to tell you what effect that had on me on the game Spartacus, but I want to give the other example here. See if this sounds familiar. At another game club meeting with my same buddy there, someone came up to us and asked if we wanted to play a game of Battlestar Galactica. No, I hadn't played it before, and I wanted to learn how to play it. So this game of Battlestar Galactica, we sat down, and it wasn't as many people as there was with Spartacus, but it was a full complement to the max number of players. Had all the expansions, and everyone else who was playing it, other than me and my buddy, everyone else who was playing it had played this game a lot, up to like weekly. In fact, all the people that were playing it, it was that game group. We were playing it with this group that had played it together on like a weekly basis for years. And so in that scenario, again, it was my first game. They inundated me with all the players, every expansion, every optional rule. And so again, I felt like I was just kind of following along, not really playing as much as following along. And I sat there, and I felt like the game of Battlestar Galactica was being played around me. I don't feel like I was participating in it. And so I was thinking back on these two experiences, and I realized something about them, though. There's a lot of similarities between these two experiences, but at the same time, the results were much different. Battlestar Galactica, I don't think I mind if I never get an opportunity to try playing it again. It was just, the experience was just, it left me soured on the game, unfortunately. Spartacus, though, even though that was perhaps even a more ridiculous scenario of playing the game, that actually sweetened me on the experience. I would like to try Spartacus again, even though I would probably like to try just the base game with maybe 3, maybe 4 players, keeping it simple and kind of relearning how to play it from scratch. But it was interesting how these very similar environments, very similar scenarios for these two games, one has intrigued me to wanting to play it more, and the other has left me to not minding if I never played the game again. And it was interesting how those very similar experiences could result in such opposite results. So, that's the question I wanted to pose to you, the listeners, today. What gaming experiences have soured you on a game? What gaming experiences have sweetened you on a game? What has made you want to do a do-over? Or just abandon it and say, no, I don't want to do that over ever again. Let me know in the comments, in the YouTube chat. And as always, to highlight your comment in the live streaming chat as you type it in there, be sure, please, to use the hashtag TMG for the metagame. Because what I'll do is I'll use my web browser search tool to highlight that hashtag, so the comments in the chat that use that hashtag are going to kind of rise to the top, and I'll see those a lot easier. So let's go here. So as people are stewing, brewing, and chewing on that in the YouTube chat, sure, why not? I'm going to let you guys kind of type up some stuff on the chat. I'm going to come back to the chat for a bit, because what I'm going to do first is I want to first go over some of the feedback on this topic, on this question, that we received from the Board Game Geek Guild posts. So here's some examples of some of the experiences people had and why, and I want to see how these compare to myself and you guys. For example, Steven mentions with the game Hive, he's had a kind of an experience. Steven says, I did not enjoy Hive after my first few plays of it at a convention. And some years later, I played it again finally under different circumstances, and I finally put my finger on what was the reason why this game, I like it now but not before. And he said that it was the environment that he learned it in. He says, yes, I do like the game, but Hive should never be taught to a slightly inebriated person in the middle of a big, crowded, loud convention. Particularly not a non-board gaming convention. So here we have, he was under the influence of an adult beverage, apparently. It was a loud, noisy environment, and it wasn't even an environment dedicated to board gaming. It was just kind of smushed in at something else. Perhaps it was a microbrew crafters convention of some sort, which would kind of tie it all together, or a wine tasting convention. I'm not going to continue to speculate on that, because that would round out the rest of the hour. Because if it's one thing I do like, it is speculation. But so there we have Stephen talking about the game. It seems there was completely inconsequential. Makes me think that any game introduced in that environment, those factors, he would have the same problem with. And it sounds like it took him quite a while to circle back to the game and get to the point where he even wanted to try it again. And simply trying it in a different environment led to him liking the game. So let's move on now to Martin. There's a couple more of these I'm going to go through, and then I'll turn over to the chat here. Martin mentions that the play experience makes up about 90% of game enjoyment to him. He says, I would rather laugh with friends at a terrible movie than watch an Oscar nominee in a boring setting. And the same goes with games. And he gives two examples. He gives Munchkin, where he says, even though we all agree that this game, Munchkin, is deeply flawed, because most every single time it's been brought to the table, everyone ends up laughing and having a really great time. So Munchkin gets a pass for his group, not because of the game, but in spite of the game, with the other people he plays it with. He goes on to say, on the other hand, I absolutely hate diplomacy, because the few times I've played it, it's led to either people getting upset with each other or getting really eliminated really early in the game. So to Martin, he says, I would gladly play Munchkin, but refuse to play diplomacy ever again. And so in Martin's case, like he said, it's 90%. The game has nothing to do with it. 90% of it is the people that you're playing with, and the group, and the environment that the game fosters. The game mechanisms, there we go. The game mechanisms may not have as much to do with it, but it is the type of social environment that the game fosters. One more from John, then I'm going to pop over to the chat here. John mentioned something which I think we'll be coming back to later in the discussion. He says, what can sour my opinion of a potentially good game is realizing that I am not being taught the game, but rather I'm only there to be an easy victor. I'm there to provide an easy victory for the person who's teaching me the game, which is a scenario I'm not sure if I've ever really been in that particular scenario. So that one really caught me off guard there. So really, I wonder if that's common, and I wonder if it's intentional from the teachers. Is it a case of someone maliciously saying, oh, I'm just going to play this, and oh, look, I can win, so I'm going to take advantage of winning because that will give me the thrill of winning, so because forget this guy, I just want to win. Or is it a case where the teacher is trying, but is just not a very good teacher? So that's one thing that was left unanswered about John's question. And again, while I could speculate about it, I thought I would just leave that hanging out there and move on to the next item, which is going to be now the live chat. So let's go over to the live chat area, start our search, and say hi to everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join us, even with our strange start time today. Let's just dive right into Comment Central. And we'll begin our dive with Kabuki Kid. Always good to see you, and always nice to see your comments pop up first in the chat. Kabuki mentions, I played my first and only game of Traders of Carthage with a guy who took so long to teach that a neighboring table, oh boy, a neighboring table started and finished a game of Ticket to Ride before we even started playing the game. He then narrated every move. I'm sorry, we've all been there, Kabuki, and I can picture this happening. He then narrated every move, and the game dragged on forever. I never wanted to bail on a game more than that before, but I would never do that. Definitely a terrible experience, and I never want to play that game again after that experience. It's not the game's fault, though, of course. So here we have someone that is, I think this actually segues very nicely from John's point of where he's talking about the being taught a game just to allow the teacher to beat you. I think this shows the opposite. I think this situation that soured Kabuki Kid on Traders of Carthage was the teacher. And again, that stinks because we all love games and we love sharing games. So I don't want us to be afraid to teach a game. And, we've all been in a situation and we've all caused, times where we have a game, we all want to play it, but we haven't had enough time to, go through everything and master it to teach it. So we pull out the rule book and we start stepping through the rule book page by page to teach the game, which is a horrible way to teach or learn a game, but sometimes that's what it takes. So I don't want us to come away thinking that we shouldn't get ourselves in those situations because it's just the nature of the beast. Learning a game, sometimes that's what it takes. Well, that's my opinion, at least. But in this example, it seems to me that it is more than that. This is a case of someone teaching a game in a poor way. And I've said it before, and I'll probably say it again, that I think teaching a game is something that someone needs to practice. You not necessarily teaching, not practice teaching that game until you get really good at teaching that game, but just the act of how do you introduce new information, the act of teaching anything. How do you present new information? How do you guide the listener through one idea into the next idea, stitching them together in such a way that they make sense? What information do I provide first and next? And when do I keep talking? And when do I back off and let the other people who are learning ask questions and kind of mull things over and put them into a practical application to cement those new ideas? One thing I think we can pull away from this is teaching a game is not the same as just talking until everyone else is able to play the game on their own. There's a lot more nuance into teaching a game or anything, rather than just yammering for an hour into a webcam until they get it. So I'll take my own advice and I'll stop yammering into my webcam about this, and we'll move on to the next point in the discussion. Let's see here. The next hashtag comes from Mike Jones, no really, who I understand hates time like I do. Time is just time zones, and time is the worst, Mike. But anyway, Mike mentions, I myself don't mind long teaching sessions because, well, I enjoy not only sharing the game experience, but also the idea that games are mental and psychological gymnasiums. For me, it's worth it for all of these games to have it's worth it for everyone to have a full understanding of the game, which leads to less AP, and then the people may even be the source of future rules interpretations. He continued. Wow, his comment continues here. He continues to say, that's easy to say, being a slow learner myself. It's always easier to tolerate those with limitations that we ourselves have an intrinsic understanding and empathy for. Yet, it also gives me a chance to share the experience of using games as a tool to overcome that very limitation. Overall, I would say that it's the companies, not the people, who are more responsible for souring my opinion of a game. The companies and not the people. So, thank you, Mike. You had a follow-up question, which we'll get to later, which is an unrelated topic. But we'll essentially. So here's a situation which continues the idea of the teaching, where Mike Jones mentions that he doesn't mind a long teaching session. And I think this goes back to kind of what Kabuki Kid was talking about. Yeah, I think a long teaching session is not necessarily something that sours an experience in and of itself. I think it's how the information is presented during that long teaching session. Now, if it's something where, again, if someone's not expecting that long teaching session, it could turn them off to the game. If it's a game where the players feel it shouldn't require a long teaching session, it could sour someone to the game. If it takes me 45 minutes to explain how to play King of Tokyo to someone, they're probably going to start resenting that play session before we even get started. Because King of Tokyo is a game that takes 10, 15 minutes max to kind of teach, if that. And so the amount of time, it needs to be appropriate to the game, obviously. But again, also, I think a long teaching session in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing, as long as the way that the information is presented is applicable. And again, not the teacher not just narrating everything or reading everything verbatim, but actually creating a presentation out of it, knowing where they're going with what information they present next and what order they present it in and why. So that's a very good comment there. And I just realized that these are the comments before the show even started. So that's awesome that there's even comments then. Before we go any further, I just wanted to mention another thing that Mike Jones touched on, is that Florida, I believe, has a severe weather warning with a hurricane and everything going on over there. And Mike asked the question, since the Dice Tower is based in Florida, I'm in Oregon, so I'm about as far away on the continental United States from Florida as I could possibly get, nearly. But Mike was just checking to see, is everyone in Florida okay from the hurricane? He'd appreciate an update. So yeah, with this weird severe weather that's going on right now, this strange position we're in, feel free to mention that in the chat as well, if anyone has any information. I personally do not have any information about the status of anyone involved with the Dice Tower and how they are doing with the hurricane. But as always, they're in my thoughts and stuff, and I hope that they are doing well. But if anyone else does have any specifics, let us know in the chat, because it's one of those situations where it might put some people's mind at ease. All right. Let's see here. Let's go. And now we have a huge gap where the show was delayed. So I'm going to go back to the Board Game Geek comments and let the YouTube chat kind of catch up, because I wanted to share something that Blaine mentioned on the BGG thread. Blaine tells us that I believe subjective play experience does impact our opinion on a game. A group I play with is more focused on diving into the theme of games as opposed to analyzing the game mechanisms. So they're all about the play experience and the social aspect of it rather than analyzing, oh neat, let's dissect how this game worked. Now, Blaine continues to say, I find that this tends to inflate my opinion of games that I play with this group. One example is Firefly, the board game. Blaine says, I love the show, but the game is a chore. However, it took me multiple plays to realize that, you know what, I didn't really like this game because my focus was getting into the verse and the social aspect, the theme of it. So I think, so it's when his example here, he has an example where the game group that he was playing with provided such a thematic social fun experience that it actually took him a while returning to this particular game. It required him returning to that game multiple times before he even worked his way through the thematic experience he was having with his friends to realize that the game in and of itself he didn't like. And I thought that was a fascinating observation that his experience was carrying this game through multiple plays until it finally dawned on him that the game in and of itself was not as good as the thematic experience that his game group was providing. And I thought that was a really good example of what can happen with this particular topic. Robert, I'm going to go over Robert's notes and then we'll go back to the chat here and try and catch up. Robert mentions, most of the poor experiences that I've had with games were mostly due to different player counts. So now here's a completely different aspect. Again, nothing about the game group itself or the social experience of who you're playing with. Nothing about the environment or being drunk in a big non-board game convention trying to learn a game. Nothing about that. Nothing about the way that you're taught it or the teaching experience. But no, Robert is about the player counts. As a result, he continues, my opinions of a game tend to vary depending on how many people will be playing. He gives two examples. First example is he played a few games of Evolution with his wife. Now, we loved the game, but after playing a 4 and 5 player game of Evolution, I can't bring myself to go back and play the 2-player variant, even though it was fun initially. So, same game, the player social experience, thematic-wise, doesn't even come into it. It's simply that the way the game plays with a different number of players has completely soured him on playing it with a certain number of players. His second example is a game I actually saw come up quite a bit, surprisingly, in the comments, is Codenames. He says, I've tried Codenames a handful of times with various people, and it's always been lackluster. But those games were also with only 3 or 4 players. It's not a problem until I can get to at least 6. Oh, it's on, sorry. The game Codenames he has on probation, if I may say the actual words he wrote. It's on probation until I can get at least 6 people together at once. And if it fails the next test, Codenames is out of my collection. So I thought that was very that again, everything else being equal, the player count has had a very substantial impact on his playing experience with those games. What do you think about that? Well, let's find out eventually as I return now to the YouTube chat comments to see where we left off and see if I can catch up. So, Kabuki mentions, referring to my initial examples, I believe, that we started the show with, mentions, my first game of Battlestar Galactica was taught by a guy who had all the expansions and wanted to play 7 players, and the guy was the worst teacher. Not the best experience, but in Kabuki's case, it did not sour me on the experience. In fact, I own the game now. So there you go. I should also note that nobody at the table had ever played Battlestar Galactica before, only the teacher of the game, and I'm not sure, only the teacher of the game. So there is an experience where everyone was learning it for the first time, and I'm wondering if this is kind of a theme we're going to start seeing here more and more. All right. Brian mentions Seven Wonders. And he says, Seven Wonders is both sweet and sour for me. It was the first game my wife bought me, generating huge sentimental value. I can understand that. He continues, though, but our second playthrough with my family took 3.5 hours. Seriously, Seven Wonders, 3.5 hours due to ridiculous AP, analysis paralysis, and soured my wife so much that she didn't play another game with me for 2 months. Now it just sits on the shelf not being played due to these conflicting memories, and even though it means so much to me. That's an interesting one. So there we have a new element to the sweet and sour equation, the behavior of the other players as they play. In this case, ridiculous AP. I'm just trying to wrap my mind around how a game of Seven Wonders can take 3.5 hours. That must have just been an extremely frustrating experience. And I wonder what can be done in those situations to prevent it from souring the experience for the players. I don't know, because it's one of those experiences where, well, I know this might sound horrible, but I know in my own game club, some of the larger game groups where we have like 30 to 60 people for the larger game club meetings, there are certain people that I have heard mentioned. Someone say, "Hey, you want to play this game?" "Oh yeah, I certainly do." And we need a couple more players. And it's been like, "Oh well, how about this guy?" It's like, "No, he has AP. Let's not ask him." And that's not that. And there's like this little blacklist, little short list of people who are known to suffer from AP, and unfortunately causes them to get excluded from certain games. And how do you deal with that even? Because you don't want to have the experience soured for the other players. You certainly don't want to be soured on a game you want to learn, but you don't want the AP person to be soured on gaming just because their turns take a long time. So you have like this lose situation. And it's something that I've struggled with in my game club. I haven't like shunned those people, but I also have not been like this champion advocate for them. No, we must include everyone in board gaming, AP or not. I've just kind of nodded and gone with the flow in those situations. Because honestly, it's one of those situations where, again, not wanting to sour the experience for multiple people, I don't really know what the best approach is in that scenario. Does the benefit of one outweigh the whatever the Spock line was from Star Trek 2? The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one or the few, and vice versa? I don't know. I can barely quote the line, so I don't know what the answer would be. But maybe Bob knows, because he's our next comment here. So let's continue on to Bob, who mentions, "We tried to play Power Grid with 2 players, and the lack of interaction made the game kind of boring. I didn't play it again for years, but now it's one of my favorites." So there we go with player count again. So another surprising one. I'm a little disappointed that Bob didn't have my answer for AP, but to his benefit, Bob had no idea that 20 minutes after he posted his comment, that's what I would be wanting him to address. So I'll fair enough, Bob. But that's an interesting one. Now that's actually good to know too, because in my experience, I have Power Grid, and Power Grid is, I hate to admit it, one of my dust ornaments, one of my games on my shelf just collecting dust. I have not been able to bring it out with when we've had multiple people, and it is one that I have contemplated bringing out just for me and my wife to play, but I've been wary to do so because of exactly what you just mentioned. With 2 players, there being a lack of interaction that makes the game boring. There's so many other games that we could play. So it's encouraging to know that years later, with playing it with multiple players, that Power Grid has overcome that, is now one of your favorite games. It's encouraging to know that the game has this potential, and I just need to get that thing off the shelf and played. But anyway, let's continue on. Trevor mentions meanly, cruelly posts, I played Tenzi, and it not only soured me to that game, but games in general and life as a whole. Frowny face emoticon. I apologize for you. I feel for you, Trevor. The only thing I can tell you to balance out what we call post-Tenzi stress disorder would be probably trying out a few games of Strike. Track down Strike. Strike seems to be the antidote for Tenzi. So if you really are serious about regaining your outlook on life and making being alive just seem worth it again, I highly recommend tracking down a copy of Strike and give it a go. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Okay, let's move on to Pith's Attic, who contributes to mention that we managed to somehow play a 3-hour game of Hotel Deluxe. Never again. So here's a case where the game took 3 hours and the players aren't even sure, how did this just happen? So what are we doing wrong? So here's a case maybe I'm wondering if there can actually be games where it's if you're unfamiliar with a game, the first time you play it, the game always goes slower. So is this a case where it's not necessarily analysis paralysis or poor teaching, but maybe just grokking this game, figuring it out, caused it to take that long? And if so, that's a pity, but I know I've been in those situations where we have finished playing a game, and when we're done, have been like, that took forever, and we've hesitated playing it again, because while we know subsequent plays will probably go faster, we're afraid that if they don't go faster, it's not an experience we want to have. So I can understand where you're coming from there, and I hope that future games like that go faster for you, and you don't find yourself somehow in that same problem. And I apologize, I'm probably going to butcher your name, but Chaitanya contributes in the chat, hello, and says, I hated my first game of Lords of Waterdeep because I was not prepared for the take that aspect of it. Interesting. Now this brings up so many questions that I don't have the resources or the time to get into here, but because I've played Lords of Waterdeep quite a bit, and when I think of take that games, Lords of Waterdeep might be on that list, but it would be lower down on the list. I don't think that there's as much take that. I mean, people will be placing their workers on the board and cutting you off from certain things you want, and doing some things. I guess there are some cards you play on people, giving them low-level quests they have. But so where I'm going with this is I'm wondering if it was the game itself or if it was the people you were playing with. Were the other players that we've all run into where any game you play, no matter what the game is, they're going to try to figure out a way to turn it into a take that game. I am guilty of a similar thing, not with take that, but I know in myself, I have a tendency to take any game in the world that we play and somehow turn it into a negotiation game, which I try to prevent myself from doing. But I mean, even in the game of 49, you can get into some really nice contracts and deals for who gets to buy which spaces and who and why. But that's not necessarily the way the game is meant to be played. And it can sour people on the experience. So there we have another one. Approaching a game through no fault of the game, with your own baggage you bring in. And instead of playing the game the way it was necessarily designed to be played, trying to turn it into a game that's not a genre that it's meant to be. Like taking Game of 49 and trying to make it a negotiation game. Or taking Lords of Waterdeep and really highlighting the take that and amplifying the take that aspect of it. That type of behavior is definitely something that can sour people on the game and cause your entire webcast to wobble. So let's be careful not to wobble people's gaming experience. Let's see here. Let's go down here. Toyota Wolf mentions sour experience for me. Smash Up. It was Smash Up plus the first play plus 14 people plus all expansions equals so horrible. 14 people playing Smash Up. That's a lot of people playing Smash Up. And I can see how Smash Up can be expanded to play that many people, but yeah, that's a lot. I wonder. Now you mentioned it was your first play of it, and all the expansions were being used, but I wonder if the 14 people was a major factor in that. It's one of those times I wish that we could branch off into an alternate timeline, because I would be curious to know if you were to go back to the exact same players, exact same scenario, your first play again, but have it broken up into like 3 games or even just 2 games of 7 going on side by side. I wonder if your experience with the game would have been soured as much as it was. So that's an interesting one right there. And again, another one with player count directly, and other things directly affecting the game. All right, the chat jumped a little bit, so I gotta refresh here and try to find where I just left off. And I did. I lied. Seven Wonders. Here we go. Smash Up. Okay. Now I'm back and better than ever with Bob's comment. Bob mentions, I was soured on Settlers of Catan because people had different views on what a fair trade was, and thus no one ended up trading, and the game just took forever to get the right rolls for anything. Oh, well, there we have an incompatibility with the player philosophies on what constitutes trading. That's an interesting one. That game must have stunk. That's one of those just bad situations. See, that's when you need to take Settlers of Catan and turn it into a negotiation game. Take what we've learned from Game of 49 and apply it to Settlers of Catan, and you'll have probably still a miserable experience, but hopefully miserable in a different way. So, learn from my mistakes there, Bob. But again, yes, people not having the same philosophy on how to approach certain game mechanisms, that can certainly throw a monkey wrench in the game. Kabuki mentions, oh man, I played Flux exactly once. And for those of you who don't know, Flux is a card game that starts out with like one basic rule, and players will be playing cards that change the rules of the game, and the game can become this really weird, convoluted stream of rules that bounce off of each other and such. And the game can sometimes be over like that, and the same game can sometimes almost create infinite loops and just never end. Anyway, continuing. I played Flux exactly once. Playing it that once soured me to ever wanting to play it again. It was just too random of a game without strategy and seemed boring to me. Well, there we go. There's one where it's completely based on game mechanisms. Randomness, lack of strategy, it's very tactical. And so, boom, mechanisms 100% right there. So it's interesting to see how all these different aspects of gaming can affect our opinions of these games. David mentions, going back to something we were talking about a little while ago, that the thrill of winning to teach is a horrible idea. Yeah, if you're teaching a game to someone, just knowing that you will be able to have an advantage, I think that's not really the approach to gaming, especially not teaching a game. It does far more damage than good. Let's see, with big gap, and here we have another flurry of hashtags. Mike mentions Mike mentioned something that Kabuki Kid mentioned about practicing teaching. But I'm going to move on to Jeff, whose neat little avatar icon I recognize from some recent YouTube comments. So it's nice to see you here as well, Jeff. Jeff mentions, I love Warhammer Quest, the adventure card game, but I have been soured on it because we can't win. Co-ops need a way to balance difficulty. So here is a very specific scenario, being soured on a game, specifically a game in the co-op genre, because the game, again, playing against the game itself, not other players, the game is too difficult to win. So let's even just take co-ops out of the equation here. And yeah, if I guess maybe even just your experience winning, that's something we haven't talked about yet. If you never win a game, will you eventually get soured by that game just out of frustration, whether it's a co-op or against other people? If I never win the game of 49 because I'm constantly trying to make deals and negotiate and other people just aren't having it and shut me out and I end up losing, I'm going to get frustrated with the game. And if I play the game of 49 even without doing that and just play the game normal, and still just can never get the hang of the game to where I win, either through lack of experience or just bad luck, how long is it going to take before I get soured on it and never want to play it again? I think that's something that's different for everybody, but I think it is there as a factor for some people. I'm trying to think of a game where that has specifically happened to me, but I did have a game of Mage Wars that I played. Friend of mine and I we played Mage Wars like maybe once a month for several months, and it was neat. He went on and he said, I'm going to try something our next game. So he net decked. He found a deck with a very specific, unique strategy that used very specific cards, and you had to play it one very specific way. And if you took these specific cards and played it with this specific strategy, it was like you will win this game of Mage Wars in like 4 or 5 turns. So he brought that deck, I made my deck, I went in and we played Mage Wars, and sure enough, the game took 15, 20 minutes and he won in 4 or 5 turns. Handily. And it was, and in a way, it didn't make me go, I never want to play this game again, but it was kind of a soured experience because it didn't feel like we were, having this neat battle going on. It was just like, hey, I want to try something. Oh, look, here's how you can win with this game. And it was one of the last, I think it was the most recent game of Mage Wars that we've played. Now, he has moved to another town since then, so that has had part of it. We still see each other, but not nearly as often. But it definitely was something that soured the experience. And so it was, that loss, not the loss in and of itself, but it was more of a loss of, oh, well, there's no way I could ever win against that. The last time I ever played Magic online was a game, I used to play that every day. And the last time I played it was, I had a first turn loss. I didn't even get a turn. Someone took their first turn, and by the end of their very first turn, the game was over. I didn't play a single card. And that was the last game. And that was Magic. Magic Online has other issues, many other issues, but that was kind of the final straw of, well, it killed any desire I had to log on and play it ever again. So anyway, let's go back now to the chat. We got like 10 minutes left, so let's do what I've been experimenting with. Let's enter the lightning round and try to get through as many comments here as we can to get as many ideas flowing around, and I'll try not to rabbit trail as often. See what we get. Chatiana mentions again, a few people in my group also didn't take too kindly to being eliminated in King of Tokyo when the game continued then for another 30 minutes. They were bored and they were restless. Player elimination. Definitely something that can lead to souring someone on a gaming experience. Definitely. David mentions, we had a game of King of Tokyo with new people, and the game took 2.5 hours. Wow. It was weird, and people still haven't wanted to try King of Tokyo again. So there we have another unforeseen, strange, incredibly overlong game souring people on it. Chakiana also mentions King of Tokyo hasn't really gone down that well in my group at all. Nobody ever wants to play it again. So for King of Tokyo, but dems the brakes. Here we go. Scrolling a little bit, finding the next comments. Pith mentions, Tom mentioned in the live Q&A, oh, this is a hurricane update. So we have some continuity going on in the episode here. Tom mentioned in a Dice Tower live Q&A that yesterday that they'll be fine. So if you're wondering about the Dice Tower home base with the hurricane weather stuff, sounds like they're doing just fine. So that's awesome. Thank you for the update there. I had missed that information yesterday. David mentions Firefly, the game, is good if you keep the player count down to 3 or 4. However, if you want a better Firefly experience, in my opinion, Firefly Legendary Encounters is like playing an episode of the show. Oh, so there we go. A different game that might give you a better Firefly experience. It's one I want to try out. The Encounters system being added into Legendary seems to really enhance and add a lot to the games. David also mentions, the caveat, if you can get past the horrible art in Firefly Legendary Encounter. Oh, that's too bad. And actually, that's one that we didn't talk about. Can the graphic design and art of a game sour you on it? If everything else was equal, can art have such a pull and impact that it could be the deciding factor on whether a game ever want to play the game or not? I have an opinion on that, but I'm not going to share it right now because I'm going to continue. I'm wondering if other people who are familiar enough with my background and my approach to games would know my opinion on that. But let's continue on. Ken mentions, the first time I played Go, I was destroyed by my advanced teacher. Every move was countered and turned against me. The game may be great, but getting slaughtered, I never want to touch it again. I think I've mentioned before, I've been teaching my daughter chess, and I know with chess, I pull my punches. Oh, Stratego, getting her interested in Stratego, I think I've mentioned that I would take to kind of level the playing field. I'd let her set up her little army the way she wants, but then I would set up mine random. I just picked the pieces out of the box, and wherever they landed, they landed. And it put me at enough of a disadvantage that it leveled the playing field a lot. Because I think when you're teaching a game, an advanced teacher needs to be aware of their opponent's skill level and not just bombard them, because it will sour them on the gaming experience. I think we see this recurring theme here, that the way that a game is taught, that initial teaching experience, carries a lot of weight with how a game is interpreted. So that's something that before this discussion I hadn't really thought carried that much weight. But throughout the notes and the examples and the stories, I'm seeing that very initial impression, not just the gameplay, but how you learn the game, can be a significant factor in this. So for game teachers, that should be something that we are cognizant of. VJ mentions why enmesh, to the point of souring, the individuals around the game with the game itself. Isn't souring actually a way to describe loss of motivation for a specific situation? Yes, I think that's exactly what we're getting at. Yes, I think that's a really good way of defining this souring thing. Basically losing your motivation to ever want to play a certain game again. Whereas the sweetening was, even if I had a horrible experience, man, I want to try this again. And trying to determine what it is, why sometimes it kills your motivation, and sometimes it just inspires you to try it again. Jenny mentions, I tried to play Time Stories with my partner, and he has it's just a game, and who cares about the time, just flip all the cards attitude. And that really sours thematic games for us. I think that's a really good example. when playing a thematic game like Time Stories, I think the players need to agree and be aware that, some of these games do require the commitment to get into the thematic experience. If you just start flipping cards or whatever in a game like Time Stories and ignore the thematic experience, you're going to lose a lot of what that game is about. And really sour the experience and ruin it for other people. And so that's something else to keep in mind. Some games do come with that requirement of, to get the most out of this game, you're going to have to be willing to role play a little bit, get into the thematic experience, play the game the way that the game itself wants to be played. Not everything is a negotiation game. Okay, we have time for just a couple more here. So we got Mike says, might look a bit odd, one silent table in the middle of, that's Mike has a suggestion, following up on a suggestion that I think I saw it scroll by, that maybe all the AP players should play together at one table. But Mike mentions that it might look a bit odd with one silent table in the middle of an open gaming night. So thank you, though. That's a mental image now I'll be carrying around with me all day long. Let's see here. We'll wrap up here where we started with a comment from Kabuki Kid, who mentions, I play Magic the Gathering fairly regularly with a talker. He talks and the game stops completely. He won't respond or do his turn until he's done with his story. And his stories usually go on for a few minutes. And he tells stories several times through the game session. We're just used to his telling stories and stalling everything every once in a while. And there's no fixing him. That definitely can be something that when you break the narrative of the game, it can pull people out and it can definitely have a souring experience. Unfortunately, we're at the point of time where I'm going to have to break our narrative and pull myself out of it because we're out of time for this episode, and so we're going to have to move on and plan something for next time. But until next time happens, I wanted to remind everyone out there that for more board game news and reviews and commentary and such, be sure to stop by both the Dice Tower, right there, and the Pair of Dice Paradise YouTube channels, Facebook pages, and Twitter pages. Stop by, subscribe, like, follow, pledge undying loyalty. Maybe that's Google+. I'm not sure how you join that. But anyway, come by and continue the conversation on this and other topics about board games with us there as well. I want to thank everyone, actually speaking of these social media pages that are floating around right here. This past week, the Pair of Dice Paradise YouTube channel reached the milestone of 5,000 subscribers. So I wanted to thank everyone who's taken the time to subscribe there, because those types of milestones, even though they're arbitrary, they still have a significant impact on myself and everyone who is a blogger, vlogger, YouTubist, and whatever, every content creator. These milestones still do have an impact on keeping us motivated and sweetening the content creation experience for ourselves. So thanks to everyone who's been doing that. And you can go ahead and talk to us there until our next episode, which will be hopefully coming up in the next week, as long as Microsoft doesn't decide that it wants to take over my computer again for several hours. Until then, I've been Chaz Marler, your host, and thank you to the Board Game Geek Guild and the YouTube chat for playing this game of the metagame with me. Thanks. I'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.